A doctor wanted to let my son die for being a worthless drug addict, not knowing I'm an undercover FBI agent. The school bus driver carried my 14-year-old son Mason through the ER doors. His body was limp, foam bubbling from his mouth, eyes rolled back showing only whites I was running behind them, still in the ratty clothes from my undercover assignment, my hands shaking as I tried to explain what was happening. The bus driver laid Mason on a gurney and stepped back, his face pale. He just started seizing during the route, he told the intake nurse. Wouldn't stop. Been going for maybe 10 minutes now. I pushed forward, trying to get to my son, but a nurse held me back with one arm, while she typed notes with the other hand. Dr. Vanessa Whitmore appeared from behind a curtain, her white coat pristine, a tablet already in her hands. She glanced at Mason, then at her screen, her expression shifting from professional concern to something else dismissal. Judgment. She tapped the tablet a few times, reading something that made her lips press into a thin line. Mason Holloway, she said. Not to me, but to the attending nurse. 14 years old. Multiple behavioral incidents on file. Expelled from Jefferson Middle School last year for fighting. Currently enrolled in alternative education program. She looked at me then, her eyes moving from my worn jacket to my unwashed hair to the street smell that probably clung to my skin. Classic profile. I tried to speak, to explain, but my voice came out desperate and cracked. He has epilepsy. This is a seizure. He needs medication right now, lorazepam, Ativan, anything to stop it. Dr. Whitmore barely looked at Mason, who was still convulsing on the gurney, his teenage body jerking violently against the restraints the nurses had quickly applied. Ma'am, I need you to be honest with me. What did Mason take today? Synthetic cannabinoids? Bath salts? We see this constantly with teens from alternative schools. The sooner you tell me what he used, the sooner we can treat the overdose appropriately. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I shook my head so hard my neck hurt. No, you don't understand. He didn't take anything. He has documented epilepsy. He's had it since he was 9. This is status epilepticus. He needs emergency anti-seizure medication, or he's going to have brain damage. My voice was rising, panic making it shrill. Mason's lips were turning blue. I could see it from where the nurse was still holding me back. Blue meant oxygen deprivation. Blue meant his brain was dying while we stood here arguing. Dr. Whitmore sighed. The kind of sigh that said she'd heard this story 1,000 times and didn't believe it once. Every parent says their child didn't take drugs voluntarily, Dr. Whitmore said, her tone clinical and cold. But the presentation is clear prolonged seizure activity in a troubled teen with a history of behavioral problems. This is synthetic drug overdose. We'll monitor him, let the drugs work their way out of his system, and then we'll discuss treatment programs. She turned to the nurse. Put him in observation bay 3. I4 fluids. Nothing else until talk screen comes back. And get security to escort the mother to the waiting room. She's interfering with treatment. I felt hands on my arms. 2 security guards, one on each side, already moving me away from my son. I fought them. Actually fought them. Digging my heels into the floor and trying to pull free. He's wearing a medical alert bracelet, I screamed. Check his wrist. It says epilepsy. It has his medication list. Just look at it. One of the guards tightened his grip, his voice low and professional. Ma'am, you need to calm down or we'll have to remove you from the building entirely. Through the chaos, I saw Dr. Whitmore finally notice the bracelet on Mason's wrist. She reached for it, turning it to read the engraving. For a moment, hope surged through me. She would see it. She would understand. She would give him the medication he desperately needed. Dr. Whitmore read the bracelet, then looked at me with something like pity, mixed with contempt. Medical alert bracelets can be purchased online for $20, she said. Parents who enable drug use often buy them to legitimize their child's symptoms. It's a known tactic in the community. She dropped Mason's wrist, letting it fall back against the gurney. I'm afraid this doesn't change my assessment. This is drug-induced seizure activity, and the appropriate treatment is supportive care until the substances clear his system. Something broke inside me then. Not broke like shattered, but broke like a dam giving way to a flood. I stopped fighting the guards and went completely still, my voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. You need to check his medical records, right now. He has documented epilepsy with full neurological workup from Mercy Children's Hospital. He's on Keppra, 500 milligrams twice daily. His last documented seizure was 8 months ago. All of this is in the system. Check his records. Dr. Whitmore didn't even look at her tablet. Medical records can be falsified by parents trying to obtain controlled substances for their children. We see it frequently in cases of Munchausen by proxy. The words hung in the air like poison. Munchausen by proxy. She was accusing me of making my son sick for attention, of lying about his epilepsy to get drugs. Meanwhile, Mason had been seizing for over 12 minutes now, his body still jerking against the restraints, foam still coming from his mouth, his lips getting darker blue with each passing second. I looked at him and saw my baby boy, the kid who'd built elaborate Lego cities and read fantasy novels under his covers with a flashlight and wanted to be a marine biologist when he grew up. I saw him dying while a doctor called me a liar. Call psychiatry, Dr. Whitmore said to the attending nurse. I want a full evaluation for Munchausen by proxy. Document everything the mother has said, especially her insistence on specific medications and her detailed knowledge of treatment protocols. That level of medical knowledge in a parent like this is a red flag. A parent like this. I knew what she meant. A parent who looked like I did right now, dressed like someone from the streets, probably smelling like the meth lab I'd spent the last 6 weeks infiltrating, a parent who didn't look like they belonged in a nice hospital demanding treatment for their child. The security guards started pulling me toward the exit. I could see Mason through the gap between their shoulders, his small body still convulsing, and I made a decision. I stopped resisting and let my body go limp, forcing them to support my full weight. They adjusted their grip, and that's when I twisted hard to the right, using a technique I'd learned in tactical training at Quantico. My service weapon, concealed in a hip holster under my jacket, came loose from the movement. It clattered onto the tile floor with a sound like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The guards, the nurses, Dr. Whitmore, all of them staring at the Glock 19 lying on the floor between us. I pulled my FBI credentials from my inside pocket, the leather case flipping open to show my badge and photo ID. Special Agent Naomi Holloway, Federal Bureau of Investigation, I said, my voice steady now. All the panic burned away and replaced with something cold and sharp. I'm currently on deep cover assignment in a drug trafficking operation. That's why I look like this. That's why I smell like this. But my son has documented epilepsy, and he's been in status epilepticus for 13 minutes. Every second you delay treatment increases his risk of permanent brain damage. Check his goddamn medical records and give him emergency seizure medication right now. Dr. Whitmore's face drained of color. Her hand shook as she reached for her tablet, fingers fumbling across the screen. The nurse next to her was already moving, pulling up Mason's chart on the computer station. I could see the moment she found it, the way her eyes went wide and her mouth formed a small O of shock. He has epilepsy, the nurse said, her voice barely a whisper. Diagnosed at age 9. Multiple hospitalizations. Current medication Keppra 500 milligrams twice a day. Last seizure 8 months ago. His neurologist is Dr. Patricia Yang at Mercy Children's. She looked at Dr. Whitmore. It's all here. Everything she said is documented. Get neuro down here now, Dr. Whitmore said, but her voice had lost its certainty. And prep lorazepam, 2 milligrams IV. The nurse was already moving, calling for the neurologist, drawing up medication. But I was looking at Mason, counting the seconds. 14 minutes, 15. Status epilepticus was defined as continuous seizure activity lasting longer than 5 minutes. After 30 minutes, the mortality rate jumped to 40%. Brain damage became almost certain. We were halfway there, and my son's lips were nearly purple now. The security guards had released me and backed away, both of them looking at the gun on the floor and then at my badge like they couldn't reconcile the two images. Dr. Harrison Kipling, the on-call neurologist, arrived within 3 minutes. He took one look at Mason and started barking orders. Why hasn't he been given benzos yet? He's been seizing for how long? 15 minutes? Get me 4 milligrams of lorazepam Frupush right now, and someone bag him. His oxygen saturation is in the toilet. Nurses swarmed Mason's gurney, one forcing a bag valve mask over his face, another injecting medication into his IV line. Dr. Kipling looked at Dr. Whitmore, his expression making it clear he was about to ask questions she didn't want to answer. What's the delay here? This kid should have been treated the second he came through those doors. Dr. Whitmore opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. The nurse who'd pulled up Mason's records spoke instead, her voice quiet but clear. Dr. Whitmore believed it was a drug overdose. She declined treatment pending tox screen results. Dr. Kipling turned to stare at Dr. Whitmore with undisguised disbelief. You saw a teenage boy in active seizure and decided to wait for a tox screen? What about his medical history? His alert bracelet? Dr. Whitmore's hands were shaking now. I believed it was substance abuse related. The mother seemed what? I asked, my voice cutting through the chaos. Dr. Whitmore looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw her understanding what she'd done. She'd profiled me, seen my appearance, made assumptions about my life, my parenting, my son's character, and decided that we weren't worth believing, that my desperate pleas for help were lies, that my knowledge of my own son's medical condition was manipulation. She'd let her prejudice override her medical training, and now my 14-year-old son had been seizing for 16 minutes straight. The lorazepam took effect gradually. Mason's violent convulsions slowed, then stopped, his body finally going still against the restraints. But he didn't wake up. His eyes stayed rolled back, his breathing shallow and mechanical, only happening because of the bag valve mask forcing air into his lungs. Dr. Kipling checked his pupils, his reflexes, his responses. His expression grew grimmer with each test. We need to intubate and get him to ICU immediately, he said. At this duration, we're looking at potential brain injury. We won't know the extent until he wakes up. If he wakes up hung unspoken in the air between us. They wheeled Mason away, a team of nurses and doctors surrounding his gurney, tubes and wires trailing behind like tentacles. I followed, my FBI credentials still in my hand, my service weapon retrieved from the floor and secured back in my holster. Dr. Whitmore tried to follow too, but Dr. Kipling stopped her with a hand on her arm. You're off this case, he said, his voice low but audible in the sudden quiet of the ER. Report to the chief of medicine immediately, and get me every second of documentation on your decision-making process. All of it. Dr. Whitmore stood frozen in the middle of the emergency room, surrounded by nurses and patients who'd witnessed everything, her career imploding in real time. The ICU became my home for the next 72 hours. Mason lay in bed 3, intubated and sedated, machines breathing for him and monitoring every vital sign. The ventilator hissed rhythmically, the only sound besides my own breathing and the occasional beep of monitors. Dr. Kipling visited every few hours, running tests, checking responses, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes telling me everything I didn't want to know. On hour 60, they started reducing the sedation to see if Mason would wake on his own. He didn't. His eyes stayed closed, his body motionless except for the rise and fall of his chest forced by the machine. My phone rang constantly. My supervisor at the FBI, demanding to know why I'd blown my cover. The hospital's legal team, asking questions I refused to answer without a lawyer present. The press somehow got wind of the story. Federal agent's son denied treatment, and reporters camped outside the ICU. I ignored all of it, sat in the chair next to Mason's bed and held his hand, the same hand that used to grip my finger when he was a baby, and willed him to wake up. Promised him things I had no power to deliver. That we'd go to the coast and look for tide pools like he'd always wanted. That I'd quit the FBI and take a desk job. That I'd never leave him again. Hour 86, Mason's eyes opened. Not all the way, just a flutter of lashes and a glimpse of brown iris before they closed again. But it was something Dr. Kipling extubated him on hour 90, removing the breathing tube and watching carefully as Mason took his first independent breaths. They were shallow and irregular, but they were his own. I cried for the first time since the ER, tears running down my face unchecked while I held Mason's hand and listened to him breathe. He still didn't wake fully, just drifted in and out of consciousness, his eyes opening occasionally to stare at nothing before closing again. On day 4, Mason woke up enough to speak. His first word was, "Mom," slurred and confused, but unmistakably my title. I pressed the call button for the nurse, then leaned close to his face. "I'm here, baby, I'm right here, you're okay. You're in the hospital, but you're okay." Mason's eyes found mine, struggling to focus. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough from the intubation. I told him the simplified version. He'd had a seizure on the school bus. They'd brought him to the hospital. He'd been sick for a few days but was getting better. I didn't tell him about Dr. Whitmore or the 15 minutes of delay or the potential brain damage we were still assessing. Dr. Kipling ran a full neurological assessment over the next 2 days. Memory tests, cognitive function, motor skills, speech patterns, everything that could measure brain activity and damage. Some tests Mason passed easily, remembering his birthday and his address and the names of his friends. Other tests revealed gaps. He couldn't remember the week before his seizure. Struggled with simple math he'd mastered years ago. Mixed up the order of events from his childhood. The brain is remarkable at compensation, Dr. Kipling told me privately. Many of these deficits may resolve with time and therapy. But some damage from prolonged seizure activity is permanent. We won't know the full extent for months, possibly years. The hospital administration contacted me on day 6 through their legal department. They wanted to settle before I filed any formal complaint, offered compensation, public apology, policy changes, anything to keep this quiet. I told them to go to hell. Not because I didn't want those things, but because I wanted Dr. Whitmore held accountable through official channels where everything would be documented and public. I filed a formal complaint with the state medical board, including witness statements from the bus driver, the intake nurse, the security guards, everyone who'd watched my son seize while a doctor called me a liar and accused me of Munchausen by proxy. Mason came home on day 9, still weak and confused, sleeping 16 hours a day and struggling to remember basic things like where we kept the cereal or what year it was. I took leave from the FBI, indefinite personal time, while I helped my son relearn things he'd known before. How to make his bed, how to organize his homework, how to remember to take his medication without me reminding him every few hours. He had occupational therapy twice a week, cognitive therapy 3 times a week, and neurologist appointments every Friday. Our lives became structured around rebuilding the pathways in his brain that 15 minutes of uncontrolled seizure activity had damaged. The investigation into Dr. Whitmore took 3 months. The medical board reviewed everything. The security footage showing me begging for treatment, the documentation of Mason's medical history that she'd ignored, the witness statements from staff who'd heard her accuse me of Munchausen by proxy, the expert testimony from Dr. Kipling about the brain damage that resulted from delayed treatment. They suspended her license pending the full hearing, which meant she couldn't practice medicine while they investigated. The hospital put her on administrative leave, which is corporate speak for fired, but not officially yet. I attended every session of the medical board hearing, sitting in the gallery with Mason beside me. He still got confused sometimes, still struggled with memory and processing speed, but he understood enough to know what these hearings were about, that a doctor had let him seize because she didn't believe his mom, that he'd lost IQ points and memories and parts of himself because someone made assumptions based on how I looked. Dr. Whitmore testified in her own defense, claiming she'd followed proper protocol for suspected overdose cases. Her lawyer argued that my appearance and behavior had been consistent with drug-seeking parents, that her caution had been medically justified. The medical board didn't agree. They revoked her license permanently, citing gross negligence and bias-based discrimination. The written decision included phrases like demonstrated prejudice, failure to adhere to medical standards, and causing deliberate harm through denial of care. Dr. Whitmore sobbed during the reading of the decision, her career of 18 years ending in a windowless conference room, while a board of her peers documented exactly how and why she'd failed. I felt no satisfaction watching her cry, just emptiness. Getting her license revoked didn't give Mason back the memories he'd lost or the cognitive abilities he'd never fully recover. The civil lawsuit took longer. Hospital lawyers fought everything, trying to minimize their liability by claiming Dr. Whitmore had acted outside her authority and against hospital policy. They produced documents showing she'd been counseled twice before for similar judgment calls, once for delaying treatment to a homeless man with chest pain because she suspected he was drug-seeking, once for misdiagnosing a black teenager's appendicitis as constipation. Both cases had resulted in internal discipline and mandatory bias training that she'd apparently ignored. The pattern was clear. Dr. Whitmore had a history of profiling patients based on appearance and making medical decisions based on stereotypes rather than symptoms. The jury awarded us $6.2 million after deliberating for less than 4 hours. The breakdown included medical expenses, future care costs, pain and suffering, and punitive damages against both the hospital and Dr. Whitmore personally. The hospital paid immediately, their insurance covering most of it, eager to close this chapter before more of Dr. Whitmore's past cases came to light. Dr. Whitmore filed for bankruptcy within a month, the personal portion of the judgment too large for her to ever pay. I didn't care about destroying her financially. The money wasn't about punishment. It was about making sure Mason had resources for the lifetime of therapy and support he'd need. I resigned from the FBI 6 months after Mason's seizure. Couldn't go back to undercover work. Couldn't risk being unreachable if Mason needed me. The Bureau understood, processed my resignation without argument, even offered me a desk position in victim services. I declined. Instead, I went back to law school, using my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and my experience at the FBI to fast-track through a 2-year program. Passed the bar on my first attempt, then opened a small practice, specializing in medical malpractice and discrimination cases. My first client was a homeless veteran who'd been denied treatment for a heart attack because the ER staff assumed he was drunk. He survived, barely, with permanent heart damage. We won his case, settled for $2.3 million. Mason is 17 now. 3 years past the seizure that changed everything. He's in a good place considering. Graduated from his alternative school with decent grades. Got accepted to community college for marine biology, like he'd always wanted. His memory still has gaps. Certain periods of his childhood just gone, and his processing speed never fully recovered to what it was before. But he's functional, happy most days, looking forward to college and a future he almost didn't have. He volunteers at the hospital sometimes, in the neurology wing, talking to other epilepsy patients about managing their condition. I think it helps him process what happened, seeing that he's not the only one who lives with this. The case made national news eventually. Federal agent's son, denied treatment, suffers brain damage. Due to doctor's bias became a headline that sparked conversations about medical discrimination and implicit bias in healthcare. I did interviews, spoke on panels, became an accidental advocate for patients' rights and equal treatment regardless of appearance. The FBI used my case in their training materials about the challenges of deep cover work and the importance of maintaining civilian identity documents. Medical schools added modules about recognizing and overcoming bias in emergency situations, using Mason's case as a cautionary example. Dr. Whitmore tried to contact me once, about a year after losing her license. She sent a letter to my law office, handwritten on plain paper, apologizing for what happened and explaining that she'd been dealing with personal issues at the time, stress and burnout, and too many years in emergency medicine seeing the worst of humanity. She said she'd been wrong, that she'd let her assumptions override her medical judgment, that she thought about Mason every day and hoped he was recovering. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in the case folder. I never responded. An apology couldn't give Mason back what he'd lost. Couldn't erase the trauma of watching my son seize for 15 minutes while I begged for help that didn't come. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't been carrying my service weapon that day. If it hadn't fallen from my holster during the struggle with security. If I hadn't had my FBI credentials to prove I wasn't just some drug-addicted parent enabling my son's addiction. Would Dr. Whitmore have eventually treated Mason? Would someone else have intervened? Or would my son have seized until his brain died? Until he became a vegetable or a corpse? All because he had the wrong mother? A mother who looked wrong, smelled wrong, seemed wrong to a doctor who decided what kind of people deserve immediate care and what kind deserve suspicion? The answer haunts me. Because I work now with clients who didn't have an FBI badge to drop on the floor, who didn't have credentials that forced medical staff to see them as human and worthy of belief. I represent the parents who lost their children because a doctor made assumptions, the patients who died because someone saw their appearance and decided they were lying about their symptoms, the families destroyed by medical bias that's never explicitly stated but always present, hovering over every interaction between healthcare workers and patients who don't fit the right demographic profile. Mason doesn't remember most of what happened in the ER. The seizure wiped those memories, which is probably a mercy. He doesn't remember my voice begging for help, or Dr. Whitmore's accusations, or the 15 minutes his brain slowly died from oxygen deprivation, but he lives with the consequences every day. The slower processing speed that makes tests take longer. The memory gaps that mean he'll never remember his 13th birthday or his first school dance. The knowledge that his brain doesn't work quite the way it did before. That he lost something irreplaceable because a doctor looked at his mother and made a choice. I tell his story in courtrooms now, using it to illustrate the real cost of medical bias. Not abstract statistics or theoretical harm, but a real 14-year-old boy who loved marine biology and Lego cities and had his future diminished because someone couldn't see past stereotypes. Juries listen when I talk about Mason. They see the before pictures, the bright kid with straight A's and elaborate science fair projects. They see the after, the young man who struggles with short-term memory and gets overwhelmed in busy environments. They understand the cost in a way that academic discussions about implicit bias never quite capture. The FBI still sends me Christmas cards, staying in touch even though I left the Bureau 3 years ago. My old supervisor calls occasionally, asking if I'm happy with my choice to leave. I tell him the truth. I'm not happy, not the way I was before, but I'm doing work that matters. Every medical discrimination case I win is another family that gets justice, another patient who gets their story heard, another hospital that has to confront the bias in their system. It's not enough to fix the problem, not even close. but it's something. It's what I can do with the pain and anger from watching my son nearly die because I looked wrong to the wrong person. And Mason wants to be a marine biologist still, studying coral reefs and ocean ecosystems. He talks about it constantly, shows me documentaries about deep-sea creatures, explains the chemistry of ocean acidification with the enthusiasm of someone who nearly lost the chance to care about anything. I support his dreams, help him apply for scholarships and special programs for students with learning disabilities, advocate with his professors when he needs accommodations. And I try not to think about the version of Mason who existed before that seizure, the one with perfect memory and faster processing who might have gone to a better school and had more options that Mason is gone, erased by 15 minutes of denied care. The Mason I have now is different, rebuilt, scarred but surviving. 3 years later, I still can't walk into an emergency room without my heart rate spiking. Can't see someone in obvious distress being ignored by medical staff without intervening. Identifying myself as a lawyer. Making it clear that I'm watching and documenting, and will absolutely file suit if they let bias influence their care. Some hospitals have banned me from their premises for being disruptive. I wear those bans like badges of honor. If my presence makes doctors think twice before profiling a patient. If my reputation makes staff treat everyone with equal urgency regardless of how they look or smell or speak, then being banned from a few hospitals is a price I'll gladly pay. Mason graduated high school last month, walked across the stage in his blue gown, accepted his diploma, smiled for photos with friends who don't know the full story of what happened 3 years ago. They know he has epilepsy, know he had a bad seizure once, but they don't know about Dr. Whitmore or the FBI credentials or the 15 minutes that changed everything. He's just their friend Mason, the quiet guy who's really into ocean stuff, and sometimes spaces out during conversations because his brain works differently now. And that's okay. He doesn't need to be defined by his trauma, doesn't need to carry the weight of being an example or a cautionary tale. He just needs to be Mason. Moving forward, building whatever future he can with the brain he has now. I keep Dr. Whitmore's letter in my desk drawer at the office. Take it out sometimes when I'm working late on a difficult case, when I'm struggling to prove that a doctor's bias caused real harm. The letter reminds me that bias isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's just exhaustion and stress and pattern recognition gone wrong. Dr. Whitmore wasn't evil. She was a burned-out ER doctor who'd seen too many drug overdoses and made a snap judgment based on incomplete information and prejudice she probably didn't even recognize in herself. But that doesn't excuse what she did. Doesn't make Mason's brain damage any less permanent. Understanding the cause doesn't eliminate the need for accountability. The work continues. Every week brings new clients with stories that echo Mason's in different keys. The diabetic teenager denied insulin because staff thought she was faking for attention. The elderly man with a stroke dismissed as dementia because he smelled like alcohol. The pregnant woman who lost her baby because the doctor assumed her complaints of pain were drug-seeking behavior. All of them profiled, judged, denied care based on who they appeared to be, rather than what their symptoms showed. And all of them finding their way to my office because someone told them about the FBI agent whose son nearly died, and who now spends her life making sure other families get justice. Mason starts college next month, community college first, then hopefully transfer to a 4-year program with a good marine biology department. He's nervous about managing his epilepsy medication schedule around classes, worried about having a seizure in front of new people, scared that his processing speed will make him seem stupid to professors and classmates. I remind him that he's brilliant, just in a different way now. That accommodation isn't weakness, it's leveling the playing field. That anyone who judges him for needing extra time on tests or using recording devices in lectures isn't worth his energy. He nods and says he knows, but I can see the fear underneath, the fear that he's not enough, that the seizure took something essential, that he'll never measure up to who he was supposed to be. I wish I could tell him that fear goes away, that you stop comparing yourself to the version who might have existed if things had gone differently, but I'd be lying. I still think about FBI agent Naomi from before, the one who could disappear into undercover roles for months without worry, who didn't jump at every siren or panic when her phone rings during class hours. That version of me died in the ER alongside the version of Mason who had perfect memory. We're both different people now, reshaped by trauma and loss, doing the best we can with what remains. And most days, that's enough. Not what we wanted, not what we would have chosen, but enough to keep moving forward. The system hasn't changed much. Hospitals still train staff on implicit bias, but training doesn't eliminate decades of learned associations and pattern recognition. Doctors still profile patients, still make snap judgments based on appearance, still let those judgments influence care in ways that range from subtle to deadly. The only difference now is that some of them hesitate, wondering if this patient might have a lawyer or a badge or someone who will hold them accountable. It's not enough, not nearly enough. But it's what we have, this fragile web of awareness and fear of consequences that makes some medical professionals think twice before letting bias dictate treatment. Mason keeps a photo on his desk from before the seizure. He's 12 in the picture at the aquarium, pressing his face against the glass to watch sea turtles glide past. His expression is pure joy, unfiltered wonder, the face of a kid who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted to become. He doesn't look at the photo often, but it's always there, a reminder of who he was. Sometimes I catch him staring at it, and I wonder what he's thinking. Whether he remembers that day, whether he mourns the boy in the picture or feels disconnected from him entirely, I never ask. Some losses are too personal for words, even between mother and son. 3 years. 3 years since I carried my service weapon into an ER, and it fell from my holster and changed everything. 3 years since my FBI credentials bought my son treatment that should have been automatic. 3 years since I learned that belief is a privilege, that being heard depends on having the right documentation, that my son's life was saved not by the obvious medical emergency, but by proof that I mattered enough to take seriously. The lesson burns every day, shapes every case I take, every argument I make in court, every training session I lead about recognizing bias in medical settings. If rage could change systems, my rage would have revolutionized healthcare by now. But rage just makes you tired. Justice requires patience, documentation, and the willingness to fight the same battle over and over until something finally shifts. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.